So far in 2024, 41% of U.S. adults said that inflation is the biggest problem their families face, an increase from 35% last year and the highest percentage ever recorded by Gallup. Before 2021, the most people who mentioned inflation as a top concern was 18% back in 2008, and usually it was less than 10%. Normally, it's the Federal Reserve, not the president, who handles keeping prices stable. Many experts agree that presidents should steer clear of getting involved with the Federal Reserve's operations. The Fed is incredibly influential, possibly one of the most significant bodies globally. If a president could control the Fed, it might give them too much power, almost like a king. Reports say former President Donald Trump is looking into ways to have more say over the Fed. No matter what Trump's intentions are, there's a real worry that any future president might try to sway the Fed, especially given America's current financial situation. But with all this in mind, what role will the Fed play in the 2024 election? Let's find out. A committee within the Federal Reserve makes decisions that can shape public perception of the economy. That's why it's crucial for them to remain independent from political influence. Research generally supports the idea that a more autonomous Federal Reserve results in more effective monetary policy. Unlike politicians, central bankers at the Fed aren't elected, nor can they easily be dismissed by the executive branch, shielding them from presidential sway. The Board of Governors, who serve 14-year terms, are designed to uphold this independence. However, appointments to the Fed have become more politicized over the years. The Federal Reserve Interest Rate Committee consists of 7 governors nominated by the president and confirmed by the Congress, alongside 5 Reserve Bank presidents, including the New York Fed president. These 5 rotate in participation. As of 2024, 4 members were nominated by President Biden, 2 by President Trump, and Jerome Powell, the chair, was endorsed by both parties. While the Fed chair is seen as a non-political role, it's common for chairs to be reappointed across different presidential administrations. If politicians could control the Federal Reserve, they might lower interest rates to give the economy a quick boost. It's like having dessert before dinner. It feels good at first, but doesn't really help in the long run. Between 2022 and 2023, the Fed raised its interest rates from almost 0 to over 5% to help control inflation, as seen in the job market and areas of spending that are sensitive to inflation. After the pandemic, the Fed raised interest rates quickly to slow down the economy and keep prices from going up too fast. We haven't seen changes this big in many years. Higher rates mean it costs more to borrow money. However, politicians might try to lower these rates to get the economy moving again, especially when an election is near, even if it could lead to inflation later. In the past, some U.S. presidents have pushed the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates, even when it might not have been the safest decision. A famous example is President Richard Nixon's influence over Fed Chair Arthur Burns. Nixon appointed Burns in 1969, expecting him to prioritize Republican interests. In a notable 1971 conversation just before the election, Nixon celebrated a reduction in the discount rate, encouraging Burns to keep up the pressure. Nixon also imposed temporary wage and price controls to manage the consumer economy, which helped him secure a sweeping victory in the 1972 election, winning 60.7% of the popular vote. However, once these controls were lifted, the result was a sharp spike in inflation, undermining the independence of the central bank, a move now viewed as a cautionary tale. Nixon's presidency, which ended with his resignation in 1974 amid the Watergate scandal, also coincided with soaring inflation rates, which increased by 10% from the previous year. The impact of presidential pressure on the Fed has been largely negative, with little evidence that it effectively stimulates the economy. It tends to increase prices without promoting real economic growth. The number of meetings between presidents and the Federal Reserve varied greatly. For instance, former President Clinton met with Fed representatives only 6 times compared to Nixon's 160 meetings. Despite political pressures, the Fed has responded to economic crises as necessary, including during the financial crisis and the pandemic, where the need for intervention was clear and broadly supported. The data from 34 years up to 2023 shows that the Fed reacts to economic shocks regardless of the political calendar, making decisions based on economic conditions rather than electoral cycles. The Federal Reserve hinted at cutting interest rates 3 times in 2024. However, by summer, they became cautious about this prediction due to inflation rates not slowing to their target of around 2%. The decision to maintain the current policy rate, which is restrictive, aims to gradually slow down economic growth without causing a dramatic downturn. The state of the economy is likely to be a significant factor in the upcoming election. While inflation rates have been decreasing, the impact of interest rate changes often occurs with a delay, making it difficult to predict their immediate effects. Criticism has been directed at Biden's economic team, which includes former Federal Reserve officials, for substantial domestic spending that might fuel inflation. The inflationary pressures were initially triggered by the pandemic and responses from both political parties. The bulk of the fiscal stimulus happened under President Trump, with President Biden continuing these policies. Inflation generally reacts slowly to changes, and with the current high short-term interest rates aiming at combined inflation, there is an expectation that inflation will further decrease. This suggests that a move towards normalizing interest rates could be appropriate as the situation stabilizes. President Biden has promised to stay out of the Federal Reserve's business, respecting the independence of its Board of Governors. In contrast, his rival Donald Trump is reportedly looking to have more control over setting interest rates himself. According to the Wall Street Journal, Trump's team is even working on plans that could weaken the Federal Reserve's freedom, a big change from the way things have been done in the last 40 years. While he was president, Trump often said the Federal Reserve was too strict with its policies. A study showed that his complaints did influence what people thought the Fed would do, and might have even pushed the Fed to set lower interest rates than they normally would have because of the pressure from the president. In May 2024, the White House emphasized the importance of central bank independence in a statement. It warned that the combination of low interest rates and high government spending has historically led to economic problems in various societies. The statement also highlighted that the U.S. Constitution was deliberately designed to prevent the president from controlling fiscal policy, a power that is reserved for Congress to avoid the kind of financial abuses committed by European monarchs in the past. The ideal scenario, as mentioned in the White House statement, is that the Federal Reserve should operate without any alteration to its policies during an election year, particularly concerning its approach to monetary policy. So from Nixon's heavy hand to today's headlines about Biden and Trump, it's clear the Fed's independence is always up for debate during election season. So what's your take? Should the Fed have a keep out sign when it comes to policies? What safeguards would you put up to protect the Fed from election year drama? With all this talk about autonomy, do you think the Fed can really stay clear of the political storm? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more insightful videos.